Thanks for tuning into WSIU. I'm your host, Ethan Neir. On Friday, March 28th, a SIU student had their visa revoked according to a statement released by the university. While the nature of the revocation is still unknown, it does now open the door for this student to be potentially deported and continues the Trump administration's precedent of revoking visas and issuing deportation notices under uncertain circumstances. At a university known for its socially progressive leaning and history of political protest, both with the Vietnam War and a previously held protest for Palestinian emancipation back in April of 2024, this continues to shine a light on the Trump administration's aggressive stance on immigration. To speak more about the story in the Daily Egyptian, we have reporter Jackson Brandhorst. And Jackson, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, in the email you cited in your report, that was on Friday the 28th, have there been any more news since then from the Department of International Student and Scholar Services?
From them specifically, not a whole lot, but we have done a couple follow-up stories.
Okay.
We do know quite a bit more since that initial report.
Sure.
We do know and can confirm multiple students have been impacted, and that's SEVIS terminations or visa revocations. We also know that multiple students have since left the country, either via self-deportation or deportation.
Okay. So there have been deportation issues warranted to some of these students.
Yeah, we've heard from multiple people that students from SIU have already left the country.
Okay. And in the email that was made by Sigginger, it called for students to, quote, use caution on social media and to exercise discretion when participating in political protests. Do we know if any of these deportations are in any way related to a student's political activism?
No, so a huge part of the problem here at SIU is that we don't know, and I guess nationwide is that we don't know the reasons for many of these SEVIS terminations or these visa revocations. The Department of Homeland Security, ICE, is not informing the students nor the universities as to why specifically they've had their visas revoked or their SEVIS terminated. But yeah.
Okay. So not a lot of information coming out from the federal agencies at this time.
Yeah, a lot of our follow-up stories have just been pretty much not a lot of information. We don't really know what's going on.
Got it. What's your sense of how the student body and the local community has reacted to this news? I know the hands-off national protests were just a couple weekends ago. What reactions are we seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to a lot of different student organizations and a lot of different, international student communities at SIU. Mm-hmm. There is, of course, this atmosphere and environment of anxiety building as time goes on and less information comes out. I think more people, specifically at SIU, have questions more so than they do answers to any of this stuff. So that really puts a burden on, I think, the end of the semester. We've got finals coming up. It's springtime. There's a lot going on. So this adds to that. We've seen faculty respond and ask for more clarity in a couple of follow-up stories. We had some really good comments from professors here at SIU and faculty senate members here at SIU who have taken, the opportunity to call for transparency and clarity from the university. Students themselves have been sort of unwilling to speak, international students specifically, just because they don't want to further jeopardize, their education or their citizenship. Or anything like that. Even close friends of people that have been impacted by this, they're not even willing, to go on record or to speak publicly about a lot of this stuff. But from what I've seen, on background and behind the scenes, most people are just afraid and wanting answers.
Yeah, we've seen that there is a spotlight on us, partially because of accounts like Libs of TikTok, so nobody really wants to put a target on themselves to be found out by ICE or immigration forces.
Yeah, we've sort of found ourselves in the past couple of months here at SIU in the national spotlight in a lot of ways, and not necessarily in a good way. I think we've received a lot of different attacks from a lot of different angles. You have the threat of federal funding being cut, and that's nationwide, but specifically here at SIU, there was discourse in that thread that you're talking about on Twitter. People calling for us to have our federal funding revoked because of DEI initiatives. We just had an attack, I guess we'll call it attack, a suit filed where a specific organization is calling for us to stop giving out certain scholarships based off of DEI stuff, and they're saying it's Title IX. So we've had a lot of different things. We had the situation with the professor from the medical school that threw a huge spotlight on us, and then now plus all of this visa stuff. So yeah.
Now, SIU isn't the only school going through this. There have been many all around the country, and a couple weeks back, actually I think it was about a week after the announcement coming from SIU, SIUE had announced that 8 students had visa revocations. Do you think this is going to become a more common trend for universities around the country?
Yeah, I think we had an initial spurt. I believe the day was April 3rd, I think, when many students nationwide reported getting that email where it was detailing that their SEVIS has been terminated again without reason. Or there was reason, supposedly, but they were not provided a reason. I think that we'll see it continue as they start to, I think, get better at finding these students. There was reports earlier on that they were using artificial intelligence to sift through, criminal records and to get some of these kids visas revoked. There's also foundations like the Canary Foundation that is essentially getting this accumulative list of students that speak out in protest of anything going on that's they consider to be anti-Semitic. So I would suspect that we're going to continue to see a steady stream of this happening for the foreseeable future.
Now, this probably partially plays into the lack of clarity that we've had from federal agencies, but are there any guarantees that due process is being done for these students?
I think in a lot of instances, they're hoping to avoid due process overall just with the threat. So they're suggesting to them to leave themselves on self-deportation. So if you do that, you just comply, there's not going to be any due process. Due process for a lot of these kids nationwide looks like weeks, months in detention centers in Louisiana and, trials and a lot of money and a lot of effort, and to get representation is really tough. So a lot of these people aren't going to be afforded due process just because of the inherent nature of the situation. When you're struggling to pay for school and you're trying to just live here, you're not going to be able to fork up $15,000 to have, the world's best immigration lawyer take it to court.
And kind of speaking to that almost, are there any local resources for international people, whether those be SIU students or other members of the community, that they can use to help keep themselves and their loved ones safe so it doesn't get to that point?
Yeah, there's been a lot of local efforts, I think, just from student communities and international communities here. I know that, we heard that there was some fundraising going on for one of the students to pay for their initial attorney consultation, which was, of course, even expensive. And, the Center for International Education has a pretty comprehensive list of a lot of different resources that international students can use. Granted, it's just a, blurb of information and an onslaught of legal jargon and a bunch of complicated, convoluted things. You can reach out to the ACLU of Illinois, and I've spoken to them, and our students have spoken to them, but it's tough for them to represent everybody, especially because the ACLU is specific to the First Amendment and speech. So if we were to have someone on SIU's campus that they could definitively say, or at least speculate, that I'm being targeted because of conduct on social media or protests, then the ACLU may be a resource that they could use. But other than that, they don't really have immigration lawyers. We've got people in St. Louis and big metro areas around here that have a good group of immigration specialists. And of course, we do have our own specialists here, but there's only so much they can do. Aside from that stuff, not a whole lot, which is sort of a bummer.
And sort of to your point, it plays into the lack of clarity, a organization like the ACLU only helping for free speech matters. If we don't know exactly why these people are having their visas revoked, we can't use a resource like that.
Exactly, it gets really tough. So their hands are sort of tied in each instance. The student doesn't know what to do, the university doesn't know what to do, their legal counsel doesn't know what to do, and that all stimulates from the top with the federal government not supplying enough information so that they can adequately fight this.
Mm-hmm. And kind of doubling back on something you've already touched on, but since your report, there have been other students who have had visas revoked, and there has not been a whole lot of clarity from the university on any of these cases?
Yeah. I think they struggled at first to figure out how to approach this. Again, this is all unprecedented. Mm-hmm. Visa revocations have happened under every administration on colleges' campuses for a really long time, but they've never happened at this capacity and without reason, and for things such as anti-Semitism or threats to foreign policy, mm-hmm. very, new, vague wording from the federal government. So the university really struggled themselves to obtain information from the federal government, and subsequently that impacted, the media and being transparent and how we report on it. It impacted the students. They didn't know what was going on. Their faculty didn't know what was going on, and the public didn't know what was going on. In recent weeks, I think the university has sort of started to figure out that being as transparent as possible is going to be the best course for this. Mm-hmm. Not saying anything is just going to foster more fear. Mm-hmm. So, we've gotten confirmed that one visa was revoked, 2 SEVIS terminations, which technically could be 3 SEVIS terminations. At a faculty senate meeting, our provost did say that there were multiple, which was more than we had gotten in weeks past. And originally they told me that they weren't going to talk to the media at all and they were going to kind of shut it down. Yeah. But I think, again, that was more so them not knowing anything and them struggling to figure out how to approach it. But, we'll give them a little bit of grace and the benefit of the doubt because it's a tough situation for them too. But I think after our recent reporting, the university understands that being as open and transparent and being mindful and protective of your students first and foremost is the best way to approach this. And I think we're getting there.
Yeah. Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk to me today.
Yeah.
We will continue to monitor the situation as we learn more. Up next, we have Dr. Steve Tamari. Dr. Tamari is a political science professor at SIUE and is an expert in Middle Eastern studies and has been an attendant at some of the Palestinian protests that have occurred nationwide. Dr. Tamari, thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ethan. I actually am retired.
Oh.
And I retired last year. I taught history, Middle East and Islamic history.
Gotcha. So former professor, but very recent former professor at SIUE. And now recently we saw Marco Rubio recently boast that 300 foreign students have had visas revoked. Has there ever been any administration that has taken this aggressive of a stance on support for Palestine?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if this has ever happened in any situation, but I'm not an expert in that history. But it is, I think all kinds of people are alarmed, even, conservatives are alarmed at how brazen these attacks are or these, summary, at least threats of deportation or summary deportations, obviously in the case of Venezuelans or other people from Central America. I don't think there's any precedent for this. And as far as I know, there is no justification for threatening to deport or deporting people who are here, completely legally, students who have come here, in many cases, like in the case of Rumeysa, is that the Turkish woman at Tufts, at the invitation of the U.S. government as a Fulbright scholar. I think it's unprecedented. And I think the main point, it's scary.
Yeah.
And it's foolish because the U.S., this is one thing the U.S. produces that everybody wants is education, American style.
Yeah.
And this flies totally in the face of that. But it is, as a Palestinian myself too, it is a very scary situation.
and this is sort of out of your historical realm of expertise, but parallels have been drawn between historic fascist regimes and some of the ways that the administration is carrying out these deportations, specifically like in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, where he was detained by plainclothes police officers without any type of warrant. How fair do you think some of those comparisons are?
They are fair as far as I could tell. This is represents a kind of power grab, I believe, that defies. I mean, I don't think the American legal system is perfect necessarily, right? And certainly there are aspects of its execution that have violated basic human rights in the past. We're well aware of that. But I don't think this is, I don't think this is, there are parallels for this in American history, in American legal history. I mean, even the Supreme Court seems to be a bit concerned about what's happening here. And this is the Supreme Court that Donald Trump stacked himself. So, um, yeah, it's not a military regime yet, but it does certainly smack of the developments we've seen in other countries, as in Turkey or Hungary or Brazil under Bolsonaro, uh, a kind of cult of personality and uh, yeah, a riding roughshod over all legal principles and seemingly laws, as far as I can tell.
Now, there seems to be this, I guess, policy goal by the administration to equate pro-Palestinian support to anti-Semitism. And a lot of pro-Palestinian supporters would say that that is not the case, that they are anti-Zionist. For those at home who aren't familiar with the term Zionism, how would you explain that?
Well, Zionism is a political ideology that developed in the late 19th, early 20th century. It actually has a history even farther back of that among Christians in Europe, and particularly in Britain. And Britain, as the colonial power um, in Palestine at the time that the State of Israel was created, was a great facilitator of this ideology. This is the ideology that there should be a Jewish state, um, preferably in Palestine, the historic home of the Jewish people, certainly where the Jewish kingdom once was. Um, uh, um, and Zionism was very much a minority ideology, even among Jews worldwide at the beginning. Um, the justification for Zionism was that, anti-Semitism has a long history in Europe. It goes back at least to the Crusades period, and it wasn't getting any better, right,
Yeah.
over the preceding century, the following centuries, and into the 19th century. So there was a desperate need for some kind of refuge, at least the way the Zionists saw it. That eventually developed into an ideology that promoted the creation of an exclusivist Jewish state. And the British colonial authorities embraced that idea, endorsed it at the end of World War I, and helped facilitate the creation of basically a proto-state, a Jewish proto-state within Palestine, which had a vast majority of non-Jews, Palestinian Christians and Muslims, and some Palestinian Jews as well. And the ideology of Zionism is very clear. It's about maintaining a degree of superiority for the Jewish people, right? As a Jewish state. I mean, that's in the name of the that's what the country is called, right? Israel, the Jewish state, which basically eliminates the political rights of the once overwhelming majority of the population. Palestinians have always been anti-Zionist, just by the basic fact of being the indigenous people of the land. They had nothing against the Jewish people as Jewish people. They were
Mhm.
willing to accept them among themselves. I mean, there were concerns about the massive immigration of Jews into Palestine, especially, in the wake of the Holocaust, of
Mhm.
course. Um, but that's just part of being Palestinian. It's like, being anti-slavery among,
Yeah.
enslaved people. It's illogical. So now there are plenty of Jews who are also anti-Zionist as well, because not every Jew wants to be identified with this exclusivist, racist apartheid state like
Mhm.
Israel. So
Now,
yeah,
Now, I was going to say, we have seen the United States pretty unequivocally support the state of Israel as it currently exists up until now, especially after October 7th with Joe Biden giving pretty much carte blanche support to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Do you think this war and the support that the US will give, do you think that relationship changes under the Trump administration with his sort of agenda?
there's no sign of that right now, and Trump took some pretty severe anti-Palestinian, pro-Israeli steps when he was during his first term, like moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and then supporting the annexation of the Golan Heights. And I think $12 billion was recently sent to or approved,
Mhm.
a proposal by the president to send $12 billion more dollars to Israel to support it militarily. Um, and then this cracking down on dissent and Palestinian protests or pro-Palestinian protests and protesters. Uh, Nothing has been said. The last um, month and a half or something since the breakdown of the ceasefire in mid-March has been one of the worst phases, maybe the worst phase of the war on Gaza, the genocide, since it began, with a return to throwing people out of certain areas, forcing them to evacuate, killing hundreds of people. On the first night of the break of the ceasefire, 400 people were killed. The vast majority of them civilians, women and children. Um, and then the banning of humanitarian aid. It's been going on for a couple months now, effectively. All that has been, no, there's been no criticism of that from the administration. And then the whole proposal he has, which nobody takes seriously, to create a Riviera, transform Gaza into a Riviera, on the Eastern Mediterranean. So it doesn't look good, although I don't know what we can expect from Trump. Sometimes it's hard to know what will come next. But
Mhm.
it has been very, very, very worrying. And friends in Gaza that I have, I don't know how, and their families here, I don't know how they endure this. It's
Yeah.
it's almost unbelievable, the horror that has been unleashed on a relatively defenseless population by a major military power.
Yeah, and even one of the words you chose to use there, genocide, is a word that next to no US politicians are willing to say when it comes to Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. And obviously, the Israeli state will refuse to call it that as well. Why do you think there is such a level of support for the state of Israel from the United States?
I think there are several reasons, but I don't think it boils down, as some people would say, to some sort of Jewish lobby. There is a Zionist lobby, right? But I think the real reason is the military-industrial complex, which drives this economy in many ways, and in which Israel is a willing and uh, dependable partner. And people have argued, there's some good books about this, that Gaza has been, in some ways, a lab for testing new military equipment. That all the aid that the U.S. gives to Israel, it's not really giving it's not really, it doesn't hurt the American economy in any way because that money has to be spent on American, weapons.
Mhm.
So it just comes back to the corporations. I mean, business, war is business. There's no, this is a fact of life. And I think that among other issues, explains massive governmental support for Israel, even when the population is ambivalent about that.
And I think that sort of begins to explain why US politicians seem to support Israel so vehemently, despite the fact that national opinion is not on the same side. Dr. Tamari, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us.
Well, thank you, Ethan. I appreciate it.
Politico, as well as other news outlets, have reported that the Department of Homeland Security has reissued around 1,800 student visas it had previously revoked for students. These are students who either had minor criminal infractions or dismissed infractions altogether, and we are still awaiting to hear the updated status for the SIU students who had their visas revoked and those who had already self-deported. And that is all we have time for this evening. For everyone here at WSIU, I am Ethan Neir. Thank you so much, and good night.